About 2.5 years ago, the first Dune movie came out, and I immediately upon watching the movie fell in love with the universe. And I've grown up being a Star Wars kid, and I love the Star Wars universe. But after watching Dune, I was hooked. And so since then, I've read the first 4 books and have the 6 books of the original saga, and even have like a Dune Lego set. So I am Dune pilled, like I am all in. And so I've spent the last like 2.5 years of my life, it's like preaching to my friends and family and being like, this Dune thing, like it's legit, I love it, and I'm annoying them and no one cares. So when I saw that like Dune Part 2 was released, I knew that this was going to be the best movie of the year. And finally, after like the actors and writers strike, it finally came out this year, and I love the movie. I've seen contention of people saying online that this might be like the movie of the decade, and I gotta agree with them. I love this movie. So in the past, when like reviewing Spider-Man TV shows and other stuff, like I've written a script, but for this, I just kind of want to speak freely since it's so fresh on my mind. Me and my wife went last night and watched it in IMAX, and if you're gonna watch this movie, I highly suggest you watch it on like the biggest screen possible. First off, if you saw the first movie, it's gonna be no surprise to you, but this, like, the cinematography and the whole spectacality of this movie is insane. This is one of the most beautiful movies I've seen, except for like Beyond or Across the Spider-Verse. That movie is like beautifully, wonderfully made miracle of a film. So it doesn't really quite hold up to that, even though that's in like an animated realm. So for the like live action movies, the Dune movies are some of the most like visually stunning movies I've ever seen. When watching this movie, I felt like I was in like a very unique but not completely isolated point of view when watching this, because I've read the first book, I've read the first 4 books, so I knew going into this where the story was going to go, and I was super excited to see where this story was going to go in like the live adaptation format. But I knew where it was going, so I wasn't like going into something blind. But again, I wanted to see like what differences they were gonna make, because like there's no way they were gonna make Alia, like the baby, kill the Baron and do all the stuff she does, whether that be like a CGI master or like a CGI nightmare, or just like grown up Alia. So I knew there was different things they were gonna do. So going into this, I was very curious to see what changes would be made. So as a book fan, I think the changes that they made, and there was a lot of changes that they made to the story, I think it serviced the story very well. My only like small gripe is that I felt like the time spent on Arrakis didn't really feel as long and drawn out as it did in the books. I know that like when we go back to the Harkonnen planet and talk with like Princess Aurelian and stuff, there's obviously time passing, but I felt like the time on Arrakis, you never felt the full effects and like the length of the story as you did in the first, like in the book. But you still see like the Stilgar and the other like Southern Fremen that believe in Paul being the Lisan al-Gaib, like you see the impact they have amongst people, and there's specific characters in general that it shows throughout like the whole course of the movie that are like laughing at the idea of Paul even being this Messiah. But as the journey throughout the movie continues and goes on, you see that they're devoted. And the scene where Timothée Chalamet, like the scene at the siege in the south where he just like proves to everyone that he is Lisan al-Gaib, or at least convinces them, that is some of like the best acting I've seen from Timothée Chalamet. And I haven't seen all of his discography and all of his acting career, but after seeing him in Wonka to this, I got like tonal whiplash. But speaking of the acting, all of like the A-list actors that are in this film are mind-blowing how good they are. I saw a lot of discussion going into the film of Austin Butler's Phaedra, like comparing him to Heath Ledger's Joker from The Dark Knight, and I was gonna be honest, I'm very skeptical about that. I was like, there's no way he's gonna live up to that performance, and I'm not glazing it that much. I don't think he was better than Heath Ledger's Joker, but he completely embodies Phaedra. There's like when I watch Chani, Zendaya's character, I see her as Zendaya, even though I know like the lore and the backstory of Chani. Same thing with Florence Pugh's Princess Aurelian. Timothée Chalamet does a great job of making me believe that he's Paul, but Phaedra, like, yes, he has a bald cap on and he's black and white for the majority of his scenes. I completely see him as Phaedra instead of Austin Butler. Everyone on the cast does a phenomenal job. So to address the elephant in the room, like in all the discourse I've seen online and the thumbnail, like, do I truly believe that this is the best movie of the decade? Well, if we're talking like the 2020s, absolutely. I think this movie's leagues ahead of the first one. The first movie is more like story-centric, so if you're new to the Dune universe, you will like this movie more, but if you're a diehard like Dune fan, I think you'll get more satisfaction out of like the one-to-one adaptation of the first book. But I think this is the best movie of the decade so far. The only other contention would be like the new Top Gun movie and like the massive success that was, but that was like a cheesy blockbuster, like all American made. This is more of like a true art, like cinematic masterpiece where there's a lot more moving parts in this movie than compared to Top Gun Maverick. Not to diss that movie, but I think this is leagues ahead and like beyond Top Gun Maverick. So if you haven't read the books or seen like Dune Part 1 or Part 2, then I don't really know why you're like this far in the video, but like thanks for watching. But one of my like favorite things about the whole complex story, especially in the early half of the saga, is the subverted expectation of the hero's journey, right? Everyone, like I personally compared it to Luke Skywalker because like Star Wars is derivative from Dune, and Luke Skywalker is like my favorite character of all time. But like, you expect Paul to be this messiah figure that they're saying he is, and you get glimpses of it in Part 2, especially like with the character change they did with Chani, where in the books instead she is like dying in love with Paul, whereas in this one she's more like her own independent character, and she sees straight through the lies that he's not actually this messiah. And I'd argue 95% of the Fremen believe he's this messiah at the end of the film, and Chani being the 1% that sees right through it. So this version of the hero's journey like in the saga is one of my favorite things, and I wish they would have spent more time with that in this film. That is like one of my only gripes and complaints, is that I feel like they didn't spend enough time like having people be weary of Paul and his character. But comparing like Part 2 as a 2.5 hour movie to like the 700 plus page book that Dune is, or if you want to combine it into a double feature for like a 5 hour movie, you still can't get like the direct adaptation and the extensive length of like the drama and internal conflict that the character of Paul has, because it's a messy story. It's very, very complicated, but I think they did a great job of tackling that in this like 5 hours and the 2.5 journey that we go through in Part 2. Don't really know where to put this in the video, but the changes that they've made in some of these characters, I think they service them better to be more palatable for the audience that isn't as familiar with the Dune saga. So the first one is Stilgar. In the books, at least from my memory, he is this like stone cold, like he's all in as Paul as the Messiah, but he is like the leader of this Fremen, and he is super devoted and like is in love with Paul as his Messiah figure, but he's this stone cold like leader. Whereas in this, I feel like he's one of the only like comedic reliefs, and I know a lot of people, my friends included, did not like Part 1 because it's a slow burn. There's a lot of world building, a lot of lore dumps going on all the time, and not a lot of like comedic moments. So I think the change to Stilgar's character services like the audience better rather than like narratively speaking if you're going to compare it to the books. But Stilgar is almost like he is a comedic relief throughout this movie of how like over the top devoted he is to Paul. Like Paul breathes and he's like, that's exactly what the Messiah would do. Or there's multiple times in the film where Paul is saying he's not this Messiah figure, and that just makes Stilgar believe even more that he is the Messiah, because he's saying like that's something the Messiah would do. He would be so humble to not say and boast that he is this figure. It's not an adaptation like one-to-one of the book, but I think it services the story better narratively to like an audience that is not familiar with Dune. The second change that I noticed, and if my memory fails to serve me correctly, then that's my own fault, but from what I remember with Chani's character in the book, like these guys, like Paul and Chani are like, they're the dream couple, they're soulmates, and like they are just all in love with each other. And then in this movie, I feel like she's more weary of his character, which makes sense at the end of the movie when she walks away from Paul, because at the end of the book, she accepts that she will be Paul's like concubine, that she won't be his wife, but she'll be his lover, and she will bear his children. Whereas Princess Ulian, she will be like, he won't even be touched by Paul, is what he says in the book. And that ending is just so impactful that like he has to make and like marry Princess Ulian, but he's not gonna love her. Chani will be his love. But in this, at the end of this movie, he basically proposes to Princess Ulian, which is like really upsetting for Chani, and so she leaves. But the character changes for her, I feel like, are more drastic than any other character. Chani in this is more independent, which I don't have a problem with. She's more independent. She's more of her own character that sees straight through the lies of Paul. And there's a little glimpse, like in a few scenes in the tent, where she like tells Paul like it's basically like she doesn't trust him, and she knows that he's not this Messiah. Where in the book, she is trying to like calm Paul down and to not take advantage of the Fremen, because she loves him so much. But then at the end of the day, she's like, I will support you no matter what. Where in this, she is like super against him taking advantage of the Fremen, but she will fight for the Fremen because that's her people and she'll follow them, but she's not following Paul. which I think is really interesting. The last big like character change that I saw and that I really noticed in this movie was Lady Jessica. In the book, she does like a lot of the same stuff where she's the one encouraging Paul. From my memory, again, I could be like remembering wrong, but she's like encouraging Paul, like the only way to do this and to like incite revenge is to take the advantage of the Fremen. And Paul's going back and forth. Well, in the movie, she like plays Paul's hand. Like she forces Paul to go down to the south of like the Fremen, and when she goes down there, she like forces Paul essentially to drink from the water of life, and that's what ultimately makes him like see his visions more and like see the future accurately rather than just like seeing glimpses of the future. And once he fully like his third eye opens and he sees all the different paths, his golden path is like finally revealed. So like Jessica is not a villain in this by any means, but she is 100%, at least in like the movie universe, responsible for what's going to happen in the future with Messiah, which, like, spoiler alert, Paul's going to be the villain. He's going to be, like, he gets compared to the German painter that, I don't know if you're allowed to say that on YouTube, but he's like, he compares himself in the Messiah book to the German painter that did all the horrors in World War II. He's going to be like the Anakin Skywalker of this universe. And Lady Jessica is 100% to blame for that, I think, in my opinion, in this universe, like in the movies. But despite all the changes, like the action in this movie, the sound design, all the cinematography, everything in this movie is phenomenal. I love it. I've only seen it once. I saw it in IMAX. So if you're going to see it on the biggest screen possible. Bring your friends. Watch a little YouTube video to catch up on the lore of the first movie before you go. I even made one, so like I'll link it on screen right now. But this movie is phenomenal. If you're any sort of like sci-fi fan, you're gonna like this movie. It's got way more action, way more character drama, way more build up than the first movie. I cannot recommend this enough. Call me a geek, call me a nerd, tell me I need to watch more movies. All of those are factually correct. But before watching Dune Part 2, my top 4 movies of all time are A New Hope, Dune Part 1, Into the Spider-Verse, and The Batman. And ranking Dune Part 2, it beats out the slot for Dune Part 1, but it's somewhere up it's that good of a movie. I contend that it's up there with A New Hope for me as my favorite movie of all time, but I need to watch this more times to understand and like let it sit with me to see how much I like this movie. So yeah, 10 out of 10 movie of the decade, at least for like the 2020s so far. It'd be tough to see what tops this. Messiah doesn't have as much action. It's more character drama, so I think it'll be like closer to Dune Part 1 when they eventually make the third movie, but I'll be seated day one in IMAX on midnight release for that movie. The director is a genius. He's going to change parts of the story to service the story better, to probably have more action and more humor, to be more palatable to like a modern audience. So I'm here to see for the changes that like the director wants to go in Part 3. But overall, just phenomenal movie. Just let me know if you guys saw the video or saw the movie, if you didn't, if you loved it, if you hated it, if you're just watching this because you like me. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have for now. Next video will be like the review of Spectacular Spider-Man. Wanted to take a break this week from like reviewing Spider-Man. I'm not getting burnt out of Spider-Man. He's one of my favorite characters of all time, but I've been doing a lot of Spider-Man content recently. So if you guys are interested in like more Dune content or different content in general, let me know. I'm trying to hit 500 subscribers soon, so I'm open to suggestions, but I just love making these videos. So thank you guys so much for supporting. Take care.